We have been talking a lot about the API in recent videos, and we're going to continue that discussion in this one as well. So once again, the API is a standard library in Java, and it consists of a lot of classes that do certain behaviors and certain methods for the programmer. And one class in that API is the scanner class, and this is how you read in input in Java. To read in input, we usually always call it keyboard. It's just the traditional thing we do in Java. So we're going to start with line 22, and we're going to create a variable called keyboard that is an object of the scanner class. And we're going to initialize that to make it a new object that can do certain behaviors and read an input. In order to do that, we're going to type scanner, which is the class, and name the variable keyboard. So usually when you create a regular variable, the data type comes first. Well, in this case, it's going to be the same thing. So the data type of the variable keyboard is going to be scanner. So we're going to initialize that to a new scanner object. And what I mean by that is we're going to type new, and new is a keyword in Java. And what new means is it creates a new memory address in the program that it can go grab the variable keyboard. And it can do certain things that you want it to do. So after new, we're going to type scanner again, and we're going to do two parentheses, and we're going to do system.in. So system.in is in the API as well. And .in is basically reading in input. So this lets the system know, or the program know, that keyboard is going to be used for input. That was a little confusing, I know, but as we go through and we use keyboard, the variable, it'll kind of make sense to you. So we're going to go to line 24, and we're going to create the variables that we need for the rest of the program. So we have a string name, we have an int age, we have a double height, and we have an int ID number. So that's how we're going to read in the input. Notice how we don't initialize those, because we're going to initialize them when we read in the input. So the first thing we're going to do on line 31 is we're going to read in the string. So we're going to print what is your name, because we have to ask the person. And then next, this is where we initialize name, the string variable, using keyboard. So keyboard has a bunch of behaviors or methods that basically start with next in line. And what it's saying is it's going to read in the next line, or it's going to read in the next int, or it's going to read in the next double, or whatever input that the program or the user inputs. So in this case, it's going to be string, so it's going to be next line. So it's going to read the whole next line the user inputs. So we're going to say name equals keyboard.nextLine. And I'll actually type that out. So we're going to say keyboard, if I can type, and we're going to use the dot operator. So the dot operator, once again, we use that to call certain methods that the object keyboard has. And one of the objects it has is next line. That reads in a string. There we go. We're going to hit enter, and we're just going to do it like that. And so that's going to read in the next line and save it to the variable name. Next, on line 34, we're going to read in an integer, and that integer is going to be the variable age. So we're going to print asking the user what's your age. And next, we're going to do the same thing as we did in name, and we're going to initialize age to be the next int that user inputs. So we're going to say keyboard again and .nextInt. Once again, it's just another method that keyboard has to read an input. Next, we're going to do system.out print, and we're going to say what is your height. And you can see here that we're already using name. So we're going to say Peyton, what is your height, or whatever the user types. And then that user will input a certain number, and that's going to be a double. So once again, it has a method called nextDouble that we use for only doubles, for only data types that are doubles, for only variables that are doubles. And as you can see, we're not using print line, we're using print because we do want it to look somewhat neat. So we want the question to be asked, and then the user to answer the question beside the question asked. We don't want the user to answer the question under what we ask. So next, we're going to print out everything that the user has inputted, and I will show you that. So we're going to run it real quick. So it's going to ask, what is your name? Now, what is your age? We're going to say 50. What is your height? We'll say 5'8". So here you can see that's going to say name, is Ice Cube, age is 50, height is 5'8", and ID is 30. So where I create the ID, I never take in input. We're just giving it the same ID every time. Just something I wanted to add on. So you can see here that I would say it's just 30. Now normally we would read in height as a string variable, but I wanted to show you that the keyboard had a next double behavior or method. So it prints out everything. And next I wanted to show you how to read in a character. So our character is a little different, and the character is actually, we read in a string, and we're going to use that, manipulate that string to find out the character inputted. So we're going to ask the question, are you really Ice Cube Bro? And enter Y for yes and N for no. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called input, and we're going to read in that next line. So what this reads in is it's going to read in the next line, and the user can input anything at all. It can input yes, they can input no, it can input their name, it doesn't really matter. Then we're going to create a variable, a char variable, and we're going to set it to input.char at 0. And what that means, it's basically the very first letter that the user inputted. So if the user inputs yes, that's going to be the string that's inputted. And how it works is it goes 0, 1, and 2. So 0 is going to be the very first letter, and 1 is going to be the second, and then 2 is going to be the third. That's how every program or every language works. It starts from 0 and it goes up. And one of the methods that the string class has is we can figure out which letter we want to represent that certain variable of the char. So we're going to say input dot, and we want to set it to char at position 0. So char basically means that which letter you want to set at, and we're going to put 0. Basically means the first position of that string. And next we're going to print out right here. So we're going to just type in yes, and it should print out Y. So we're going to run it again. What's your age? 50. 8. Are you really Ice Cube Bro? We're going to type yes, and it's going to print out Y. Another key point I want to point out is when we create the keyboard variable, it's a little different than when creating the data type variables like the keywords in Java. So when creating this variable, when we retrieve that variable, it's going to be what's in age. So in all the memory of your program, when we want to figure out what age is, we just go straight to that variable, and that variable memory holds that number. This, on the other hand, is an object. So what that means is it holds a certain memory address where to retrieve it. It doesn't hold the actual numbers or data. It just holds a memory address where to retrieve it. We're going to create an object variable, and that's why we use the new keyword, which creates a new object memory position that can be held. I know it's a little confusing, but when we deal with classes and methods later on, you'll start to catch on. The last thing I want to point out is what a buffer is. So you can see here on line 49, we're actually not reading in anything. We're just reading in a blank line. So what I mean by that is we're going to run it real quick and I'll show you. So I'm going to go back to use input.java, and as you can see here, we're going to read in every variable every time we ask a question. So we're going to start from the beginning, and we're going to read in the name. We're going to read in the age. Then we're going to read in the height. And then we're going to display the data. Now this is where an extra line gets printed. So we have to have a buffer where we can read in a line. That way an error won't happen. So I will show you the error before I explain it. So we take that out and we run it. So right here, this is the error that you will get, and basically it skips the whole line of you asking, are you really Ice Cube or not? And why it does that is because there's an extra line in there somewhere that we're not reading in correctly. So this is the focus moment, and you kind of got to wrap your head around how the cursor moves. We've had a focus moment this before, but this one's going to be a little different. So we're going to put this back in. We're going to run it for the last time so I can show you how the cursor moves. So the first thing we ask is, what's your name? And see how the cursor is right there. So we will move it. And now we're going to read in the next line. So the cursor will move once again to where your age is. And then it's going to move where the height is, 58. And so then we're going to display the data. So how this works is the cursor was right here. And then once we print out the name, the cursor will be right here. And then once again, it will be right there. And then after we print out the height and print out the ID, it'll be at the end. So now we need to read in a blank line to make sure that the cursor moves down here and then prints, are you really Ice Cube or not? So if we don't do that and we take out that keyboard.next line, it's going to print, are you really Ice Cube right here? And then it's going to print the new line, which is read by the input. So in order to avoid that, we got to put in just a blank next line, and it reads in a buffer. So we're going to read in the next line, which is the buffer, and then it will get printed, are you really Ice Cube or not? And then we will have the choice of putting yes or no, which would be read by the variable input. That wraps up the video, and I'll show you the focus points.